One in Law podcast. You get the information you need in terms you can understand and act upon.
Okay, hi everyone. Welcome to the next episode of Yohanan Podcast. I'm here with Gary Liskovich, and he is one half of Harmonyze, formerly known as Legal Hat, and they are a franchising software company, which we're going to hear much more about. But first, I want Gary to just introduce himself and talk about, how he grew up, how he met Johnny, his partner, and how he got into software in general.
Yeah. So I'll give you the quick rundown. I am Gary Liskovich. I am co-founder and CEO of Harmonyze. My co-founder, Johnny Greenspan, we're both friends of yours and friends of the firm. And we build software that helps franchise networks run their operations at scale. And we do that largely on the backs of some really great AI that we've built. But I'm happy to dive into whatever it is you want to dive into.
Yeah. So let's start with how you both got into just technology in general. Like, were you into that growing up? Did you just get into it like in college?
Yeah.
Was it a job? How did you start with that?
I think important to the whole thing is how Johnny and I got here, which is we met when we were 11 at the start of middle school, and we went to different public schools down in South Brooklyn. We both went to a middle school, a magnet school in Coney Island called Mark Twain. And we met there doing already some more of STEM. I was in science talent. He was in math talent. Johnny always had his focus on math. I similarly just STEM overall. And we found our ways to it in different ways. I think my parents as immigrants really focused on STEM and the value of a STEM education, and whether through selective positive reinforcement or just that natural drawn towards it. I found myself going towards technology at a very young age. And Johnny similarly was focused on it. We went to different high schools, but we both did technical programs in our respective high schools. And then we both went to engineering colleges. So he went to the Cooper Union here in New York City. I went to RPI, Rensselaer Polytechnic Institute up near Troy. And, if you're not familiar with the schools, both of them are heavily focused on engineering and have really great engineering programs. So it really was this continuation of momentum that we both had in our educations. So I focused on mechanical engineering. Now, I started as a biomedical engineer, and then with mechanical engineering, it felt like this very broad catch-all engineering discipline where I could start to, tinker and see which form of it I liked. So I did a few things. I took a few jobs while continuing my education, and I did. I looked at control systems. I worked for a really cool company that worked in the automotive space called ClearMotion. I did biomedical engineering out with Gore Technology, Gore Tech. They also have a medical products division. And then, I liked both of them. They were both interesting, but they didn't feel like the thing that I really wanted to pour myself into. And then I really started to focus on fuel systems, actually. And that's what I did my thesis in for my grad degree, also at RPI. And that also, that felt like something that was interesting enough, but not something that I really wanted to do. And while I did love engineering and I loved the art of, taking science and bringing it into practice and bringing it into the real world, I didn't feel like I knew exactly which one I wanted to do. So I did the thing that everybody does, which is I just said, I'll go into consulting. And I went into Deloitte Consulting out of college. I primarily worked on Pfizer. And there I did a lot of business-minded technology and, was very adjacent to software. And that's really where I started to find my footing. And I kept really going with that and pulling on that thread. I moved away from the consulting model into the startup model. I worked at a few startups and now starting my own. But it always has been that, that combination of true engineering and science pulled into the business world.
God. Okay. So you were a more generalist engineer, and I guess you got into software because that was just where the jobs were needed.
I would say it felt like it moved fast, which I liked. There was kind of this really rapid ideation to, testing the hypothesis to actually bringing it to market, which it's kind of hard to get in other forms of engineering and other forms of technology. So I really loved that, the speed of that. And I got pulled in through, mechanical engineering through the product management route. And I was very fortunate in that I was surrounded by folks that understood the product management discipline and thought I would be a good fit. They asked me if I thought it was something I would be good at. And I kind of got pushed in that direction. And I'm so glad that I did.
Do you think it's good for people who want to go into technology that they should find very technical colleges and take four-year college seriously like you did? Or
it's a good question. I would say depends, right? To a lesser degree now than it used to be. I think more broadly, we as a professional society are moving away from qualification and more towards merit. Now, merit still has merit is the focus here, and I think there is two kinds of merit-based evaluation. The first is real time, which is let's sit down and you're going to take a test or kind of do an activity, and we will evaluate you on that. And that's kind of that. Do you have the skills right now? Although I think it isn't a great measure because that environment isn't a true environment to how things work. And then there's retroactive merit evaluation, which I think is pretty great. And essentially is how much have you actually done this job and how much can I qualify that you've done these things in the past, and I can talk to your references and understand it. Now, understanding the quality of those references and whether it's true is difficult. Right now, there's a combination of those. I think the unfortunate thing about a degree is that if you have, the entire hiring process is about mitigating risk or trying to find the candidate that will do the job. And if you have two candidates that are exactly the same and one of them has that qualification or another qualification, whether it's a four-year degree or something else, I think there is, it's a tiebreaker and people with that qualification will go forward. So I think it's an aid. I think it helps get the job. I don't think that it's necessary to perform well in the job. But overall, I think there are many alternative paths now.
Okay. Similarly, what about, high-powered W-2 employment, like working at a big consulting company or even working in a W-2 role at a startup? Do you think that was helpful?
Financially, sure, right? Like, if you're trying to mitigate, it depends on your risk tolerance, right? I think there are some really great things about a W-2 job. First is provide stability, right? It gives you that flexibility to focus on other things and focus on skills without wondering how you're going to actually pay bills. I think at the same time, it also brings this really cool thing, which is if you want to know how to build technology as a team, education has some form of that. But realistically, if you're going to be a solopreneur, it's not actually how you build software as a team. And that is its own set of skills, which is pretty hard to get outside of a big organization or even a small organization that has you on a W-2. I think those things it provides well. And I find, now being in circles of entrepreneurs, I think many folks do take that path of being in a W-2 for a little while, gaining both skills and financial security, and then taking that leap into entrepreneurship or taking that leap into, consulting or forming their own path. And I think if you have a risk tolerance to do it earlier, you can. If you don't have a risk tolerance at all, maybe you should stick to a W-2. And it really is an individual question.
Yeah, that's a good point. I think the W-2 gets a bad rap for people who want to go into entrepreneurship. And I think probably the biggest reason is you need money in order to even think about what your entrepreneurship is going to be. So, most people who have creative achievements, they do so within the context of, having a little space to breathe a little bit. And that's not even to mention all the educational benefits you get from being in those environments. But obviously you don't want to get golden handcuffed if your goal is entrepreneurship. But okay, so I want to pivot back to technology in general and specifically the rise of AI as what seems to be the preferred type of software company now for investors, or at least where most of the hype is. And I'm curious how you chose to get into AI and specifically why you started looking at legal tech within that.
Sure. I guess I started with AI before this massive wave. And I think I was quite lucky in that one of my sisters was doing research in AI and was very involved. Her education was in it, and that was back in the late 2010s. And I knew that this was a new form of technology. I knew there was an increasing investment in it. There's no way I could have predicted the way that ChatGPT would fire the starting gun in many ways, but I did know that it was a really cool new way to do things that weren't otherwise possible and a really novel technology. And because of that, I think I knew about it to a certain degree, but I had never worked with it in a professional setting. And that's one of the reasons that I joined Evolution IQ, which you and I have talked about the company in the past, but easily the most transformational part of my career has been the years I spent on that company. And I started working with them because the team was small. It was around 15 people, and already they had PhDs who had been working on AI at Google, and it was just this really smart group. And we were working on a lot of machine learning, which is different than Gen AI, and we were using both of those to actually change and analyze huge amounts of data that there's no way you could have done it without AI. So it really felt like the cutting edge and this unlocking of a new set of data that was being captured but not being used. And that really guides my philosophy in building AI more broadly. And I published a few articles on this. The idea here is that it's more about, you have the ability to access huge amounts of data that we are recording, and how do you operationalize that at scale to create benefits, whether for the consumer or the business. And that dovetails into how we got into legal tech, which was that, Johnny had been building this really great technology, and I'd been helping him. We had started ideating, and we said, great, we have this really cool tech that is amazing at understanding legal in particular. How do we find an application for that is operationally efficient for a business or a consumer or anyone? And we started finding places where we thought that legal was leading to operations. And this better than most, is that most legal is not, a courthouse and, suing, but actually it's on the contract side and it's on the operation side. And, we understood that, and we understood we had this powerful technology. So we were looking at places where legal was translating into operations at scale. And that was our driving hypothesis. And we had a few of them, but one of the strongest was franchising. And we got very lucky in that Johnny's dad used to be a franchisee, and we knew about the space tangentially. And we started really just testing out that hypothesis with a few design partners of saying, how can we help you, and asking and learning from them and offering our technology in return. And that really was how we got the wheel started on this entire enterprise.
Got it. So why legal tech in general? Because there's lots of different professional services that could be transformed by AI. And I think a lot of people who want to get into AI are drawn to legal tech. I'm curious, why is that?
If you think about, which data is easy to use, right? Tabular data was very easy, right, for technology to use. And now the next form and the next frontier has been words, right? We actually have this really great, LLMs in particular have a really great ability to understand words over, other things like images and videos, and those are coming in the future. But in the ability to understand words, you say, okay, where are there complex words and where are they really driving important decisions? And naturally you land on legal. And I think through Johnny's experience, his lived experience, more so than mine, he had an experience where he represented himself pro se, and he had the ability to live that experience, and he knew that pain firsthand of understanding legalese and decoding it, and then also being on the technology side and understanding the power of this technology and how good it is at decoding that, and how much it would have helped him when he was going through this process. And that is kind of both why we are focused as a company or started in legal tech, and then also why so many people are using LLMs in particular to decode contracts and decode legalese.
I see. So one question about that I know a lot of small firm lawyers have is, as they try out these products, they see two ends of the spectrum, and maybe you can help decipher this. So on one end of the spectrum, you have things like ChatGPT, which are totally open-ended, really good at like reasoning and thinking through things, but also prone to hallucination, just like certain people, and then you have other types of products that maybe are a little bit more adjusted, even though they're based on ChatGPT or something like that. Perhaps they're like a little bit more narrowed down, and there's more guardrails in there that makes it more applicable to certain legal situations. And as a result of that, there's less hallucination, but perhaps the reasoning isn't quite as strong. And for a lot of lawyers who have these legal tech plugins in their Microsoft Word or otherwise using the products, they notice that those catered products are not going to be like completely wrong about something like ChatGPT, but at the same time, it can't really think through things with that same level of intelligence. Can you say a little bit about like the general, why are we at where we're at right now technologically?
Sure. I think to say that a lawyer is not doing an incredible amount of creative work, even if they don't think so, is inaccurate, right? I think you and other lawyers are doing an incredible amount of data compilation when you are working with clients. One of those is the understanding of the legal system. The other is the understanding of the client, which, requires the ability to ask questions and draw from other clients' experience, and just has, an incredible amount of wealth of knowledge. And I do think the legal profession is an incredibly creative field, which, to your point, is when you're sitting with a client and when you're trying to, help reason through what is best for them, is not something that can be done well by technology today, and certainly not in the near future.
Okay, so what you're getting at is the difference between legal operations and just, I guess, legal services. And I think one way to think about this is legal operations is a lot of stuff that happens after the contracts are signed. And I think there's different words for it. Like a lot of companies have people that are called like contract managers, or like a lot of just chief operating officers sort of play that role. But the contracts govern what happens, and a lot stems from the contract. So let's get into franchising specifically. So what is franchising, and what's the role of contracts within franchise?
Sure. So fundamentally, franchising is the way to pass forward an idea, a business idea. And that's the role of a franchisor, where they say, I have this phenomenal idea. I make cookies, right? That's a very easy one. And I think that this model, this business can thrive all across the nation and across the globe. Now, one way to expand that is to, raise a bunch of capital, open up a bunch of stores, and really have an iron grip on that process. And that's where you see, retail, commercial retail companies like Starbucks. And then on the other side, you have the franchising model, which is, I'm going to find local entrepreneurs.
Okay, so if I'm a franchisor, like let's say I have, an amazing like coffee shop chain, super cool, and I have 50 franchisees around the country. Someone comes to me, a maker of ovens or whatever, to cook the pastries, and says, look, I'm going to give you 50 of these amazing ovens. You can supply them to all the franchisees around the country. And I'm like, great, let's do it. And they say to me, Adam, you have to make sure that all the lease agreements in all those franchisees will even allow our ovens in there. And then I'm like, this sounds like that's a legal operations task. Like there needs to be, that's just data. That's not legal analysis.
It works both ways. It's a really great example, right? Because on one hand, you can say, how many of these leases allow for it? The other ones is, you might require, let's say you're just starting out. You're like, great, I need this oven. This oven's going to be transformation. Every new franchisee, I want to make sure that the lease they sign has a provision for that, right? So it's forward looking, it's backward looking. And it's not just these one-offs, but it's things like, hey, are you doing a certain thing every month? Are you putting money aside as I think is right for you as a franchisee? I'm not asking you to spend it, but I need to make sure that you're stable as a company and you have certain amounts of money aside. Or if you have requirements on marketing, that's a really big one, to make sure that you're investing in your local marketing. And there's all of these things that touch, back office, front office, staffing to a certain degree, though staffing is very tricky because of dual employer regulations. There's all of these things that tie into that, which is to make sure, how do you, the franchisor, make sure the franchisee is doing the things they need to do, and that you are making good on all the promises you promised that franchisee without overburdening your team?
Right. So there's a lot of financial metrics that are supposed to be controlled by the contracts. Probably it could be things like spend this much money on this type of ads, or keep, it could be balance sheet things like keep, this amount of accounts payable or this much money in the bank. And so the franchisor needs to see where everyone stands and needs to monitor that in a way that's not going to require a massive workforce.
I'm gonna go even one level deeper, which is interesting that not every franchisor-franchisee relationship is the same financially, right? And while you think that, Dunkin' will probably have some form of the same relationship with every franchisee across the nation, that's probably not true. And one of the reasons is that not every local market is the same, right? Now, things like minimum wage fundamentally change the way that, the fundamental economics of that franchisee's business. Things like tax incentives, whether they're local or deductions, things that fundamentally change their economics now start playing into here. And now you ask yourself as a franchisor, right? If I want to get access, let's say my business model makes perfect sense in 25 states, and I want to now bring it to the remaining 25 states, there might be a kind of a reassessment or negotiation at that state level, or even at a local level, or on an individual level with a franchisee, to make sure that the fundamental economics make sense for everybody involved. And now when you have that level of customization at scale, that's when it becomes really interesting to monitor, right? Because not everyone's looking at the same thing. There's different There's different obligations. How do you make them? They have changeover dates. There's incentives. It's quite complex.
So what I'm hearing basically is that, expansion for a franchisor could be held back by administrative costs of tracking so many things.
Oh,
And so without the technology, someone could say, like, look, I can only do the 25 states, even though, maybe for marketing reasons, I'd love to be in 40 states, but I just can't deal with, certain employment or tax laws. It's just too much for me to track. But with technology, maybe they could, is the idea.
Yeah, right. It's like kind of like a race car, right? It doesn't matter how fast your race car is, right? You need a pit crew. If you have just one person changing all the wheels, you're going to lose the race. Right? It doesn't matter how much you're investing in the technology behind the race car, or how well built, how well you're sourcing the parts, right? It's all going to be around like, well, I have 5 people. I need all 5 of them to be changing tires. And that's where I'm going to invest in it, right? Versus, and let's say you only have 5 people and they're scientists. You're going to ask that scientist to go and change wheels because that's the thing that's best for your race car. But when you change the paradigm of like, well, you can actually have one person changing all the tires so that the remaining 4 can go back to the lab and start enhancing and making the whole process better and the whole race car move faster. That's what we're moving towards, right? Is the ability to free up that admin work so that people can invest more in growth and have their people thinking more about growth and ideating and tinkering and making the franchise system better, which is, naturally just a better way to operate. Which is, again, that's my big prediction, is that franchising is about to have the most massive 10 years it's ever seen, because it's just jam-packed of entrepreneurs. And when you remove that operational inefficiencies, they're just going to ideate and move faster than anyone else.
Okay, so that's the big roadblock right now, is operational inefficiencies. And for a lot of people are actually confused by that because they think it's simply just about partnerships and joint ventures. And they're like, well, what's so hard about that? Lots of people do that pretty efficiently, but it seems like here there's a big web of not only managing the state by state laws, but the federal government has quite a regulatory interest in this space as well. So how does that play into the whole process?
I mean, the tax pieces we talked about are fundamental, right? And I do think that the government is working on this, but needs to draw a very clear distinction between the Starbuckses of the world and the Dunkin' Donuts, which an outside consumer may seem like 2 different businesses, but they operate fundamentally different, and they keep money in local economies in the Dunkin' Donuts case much more than in the Starbucks case, right? And there, I think regulation needs to continue to draw that distinction. I think that one of the really great things that's coming out of regulation at the federal level around franchising is transparency. You can see how in this model, historically, there have been some predatory actors, way back. And I think there is a focus on transparency here to say, if you're going to buy into a franchise system, let's understand it, make sure that you, the franchisee, are really aware of the ins and outs of it. I think that's great. But really, a lot of the focus here is going to be on tax, fundamental economic policies that change how these small businesses, the franchisees in this case, operate, and disclosure.
So for people who don't realize about disclosure, the kind of the fundamental point of the federal franchising regulations is that the franchisor has to give a very long disclosure statement outlining in great detail all the terms of the relationship and how everything's going to work. And the law is a bit more focused on maintaining that transparency and the disclosure more so than policing the relationships after the fact. So what kind of things need to be, on this disclosure, and what kind of a burden does that create? And how can, technology help with making sure things are accurate, and then, taking that forward as you keep expanding?
It's FDD is the document that everyone's required to have. It's a franchise disclosure document. Now, certain states make that public. I think Wisconsin's one of them. The entire purpose of this is to say, if you, Adam, are buying into a franchise system like Dunkin', what are the economics of that business that you are buying into? But also, what are the capital requirements, right? Like, what is the initial build out? What cash do you need to have on hand? And that does 2 things. First of all, it makes sure that franchisees that don't even qualify aren't wasting their time exploring a Dunkin' franchise. And also it makes sure that they understand the support they're getting. And that's many of the things that are outlined is, what are the things the franchise system is going to provide, and what are the economic incentives they're going to get out of it. And the final one is how risky is this venture, right? Buying a franchise system. Now, if you buy into a smaller system, you're probably going to get a better deal. And it is less proven out, right? When you have thousands of Dunkin' Donuts, it's a pretty reliable system. You know what you're getting into. You can safely bet you're going to get certain things out of it. But that's what the entire disclosure process is about. And it's not just about the document itself. It's about the timing of it as well, so that people have time to receive this information, sit with it, and they're encouraged to seek the advice of lawyers like yourself to review this document and interpret what it means for them as a business owner, which I think is a really great and powerful thing. And overall, just the franchise community is more and more invested in transparency here.
Okay, so for the small franchisors who they have a few locations and they really want to go massive, they want to go national, like what can your product give them that's going to make that happen? Like right now,
not a whole lot, not a whole lot. So we don't really make sense for, think about it, right?
I'm talking about the franchisor.
Yeah. So I'll kind of walk you through this. So if a franchisor, if you have two franchisees, these are your best friends from a business. They're essentially your business partners, right? You have them on speed dial. Anything question they have, your obligations to them. It's not a huge ecosystem if you only have two franchisees. We likely don't make a lot of sense for them. Now, that stops scaling pretty quickly. So once you start getting into the order of dozens of these, cannot manage them out of your cell phone as a franchisor. You're no longer in founder mode. So then you ask yourself, how do you actually manage these relationships? You bring in some really great people that know how to manage those relationships and understand franchising. And that's really great. And then soon, as your system scales even more, they start reaching capacity. And then as you grow and grow and grow, you just keep reaching that capacity. And the only way to do that is to ramp up these teams to these really, large teams, which we don't see anyone does in practice, right? It just becomes it doesn't scale.
Got it. Okay. So another, thing that people might be considering, they might say, okay, I have this huge network. Why don't I just build out my own software? Versus taking something off the shelf. They might say, you know what, Dunkin's got their own system going on. I could be like Dunkin'. Why are they better off taking software from a provider like yours?
Yeah, I think there's everything that we've heard from the industry is that this problem of managing your obligations, it starts happening when you have dozens and it never stops, right? Just as you grow and grow, the problems remain all the way through. Now, in terms of what it takes to build that out, there is a huge technology lift, and a lot of the system we've designed is one that mimics the franchise network and is a true parallel to that hierarchical nature and the relationships that we see in franchising. There is a thing where if you want to invest in these massive teams to build out these really critical technology, Dunkin', I'm sure, could hire an army of technology consultants to build out something for them. The question is that actually more profitable or economically sound? I would argue it's going to be much cheaper to work with a company like us that already understands the problem, has technology built, because you get it sooner. It's already proven, and it's the power of deploying technology at scale. It's going to be cheaper.
So what's your vision for the franchising world in the next 10 years? You said it's going to have the biggest 10-year run ever. What can we expect to see from that?
I'm going to lean back on what I said earlier. So as I said, franchisees, franchisors, it's just the franchising network is jam-packed with entrepreneurs. Entrepreneurs are constantly tinkering and experimenting and figuring out how to make things better. And that is the power of franchising, is that you have incredibly kind of almost business scientists sitting in every corner of their business networks. Now, historically, coordinating this network is really, really hard. And now what we see is that administrative work by companies like us is getting a lot easier. So now you get to really tap into the superpower of having entrepreneurs there. And going back to what I said about the race car, right? You have these scientists that are now changing wheels that are now getting pulled back into the lab, into making the race car faster. And I think systems that are full of franchisees are going to be moving faster, innovating faster, and are going to win out against these corporate brands that try to micromanage at every location. And I think they're going to overtake, and franchising will become the predominant model for scaling and for running these massive networks.
I love that perspective on how AI drives growth by getting the good idea people to have more bandwidth rather than just focusing on how it cuts things out. So if someone wants to get involved with Harmonyze, if they're a massive franchisor, how can they get your software?
Reach out to me on LinkedIn or via our website. We have a form there. We're incredibly responsive on it. And we welcome a conversation with everybody. The way we look at these partnerships is not that we're deploying software, but building a partnership really. And what that means is that there is a process where we get to know the franchisor and, show them what we do and make sure that it's a good fit for them. And then we move forward. So, just to have that initial conversation and get to know each other's organization, any of those work.
All right. Awesome. Appreciate it. If you're listening to this for the first time, subscribe on the audio podcast links or subscribe on YouTube or LinkedIn. So thank you very much, Gary. And I'll see you guys soon. Take care.
Thanks, Adam.